Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Energy Markets podcast. It is Tuesday, June 24th. It's 10:30 a.m. in the UAE in the Gulf, and we have oil markets, Brent crude oil, selling off sharply again this morning after a big drop yesterday. You probably could have made a very large fortune if you shorted this market yesterday. One in a million, I would imagine, were doing so, even as missiles flew across the Gulf from Iran to Qatar. Oil prices were falling. You're never going to see that again, I suspect. I suspect we witnessed a once in a lifetime moment yesterday. Oil prices falling while missiles rain down in the center of the world's biggest physical energy producing world. Let's try and unpack that. Let's start off this morning in Turkey and with one of our regular commentators, Mehmet Agucu, Group CEO, Global Resources Partnership, and Chairman of the London Energy Club. Mehmet, let's just sort of start from some common ground of agreement. The current war between Israel and Iran is now over, as Trump, already the marketing machine, branding it the 12-day war. Can we sort of agree, despite the few little details maybe of the today, that this is now over in its current form?
Well, whatever Trump says, sometimes we take it with a pinch of salt. He said he's going to finish the Russian-Ukraine war in 24 hours after he takes over as president. And then he also retaliated China with high tariffs and take a step back. Now, while, as you said, exchange of missiles in Tel Aviv and Tehran, and all of a sudden he announced the ceasefire, while we were expecting perhaps even the closure of or mining of Strait of Hormuz. So this is an unexpected ceasefire. If it will hold, of course, it's very much welcome. It seems that the markets already bought that with the decline of prices, as you say. However, I think it's a long run. I don't think it's going to happen that soon. A ceasefire will hold or not, we have to see it, because it's very fragile. And Trump keeps warning two sides not to violate it. And also, what is the end game here for the US, for Iranians, and for Israelis? Whether they reach their end games? Israel
Well,
said.
maybe let's start with the last one, because it's the last one that started this, if you like. Israel prosecuted this war from Friday, 10 days, 12 days ago. And would you say they have completed their objectives, that they are happy to stop? Who's doing the victory dance here, I suppose? Israel, it
Well,
looks like.
well, I don't think Israel has achieved its goal yet, because it wasn't only the nuclear facilities. This was US goal, and they achieved it. The end game completed. So now back to the negotiating table, Trump is saying. But from the Israeli point of view, I don't think that they invested so much in this attack, starting from Gaza to Lebanon, Syria, and now Iran. And there's an end game in their mind. Before they reach that, of course, there might be some temporary setbacks or
And what's that end game,
cost.
if you were to identify it? It's not the nuclear disarmament, it's something else.
I think Israel already has established a military dominance, primacy in the region, and having the Abraham Accords with the Gulf nations and trying to have a controlled ally or partner in the shape of Turkey. And so it is going to be a new Middle East order, as imagined by Netanyahu and some of of course, his allies. And I don't think that US is fully into that, because it has special relations also with the Gulf nations, Saudis, UAE, Qatar, and also Turkey will not buy into that. So the end game is not achieved yet from the Iranian position. They also established a strategic partnership with Azerbaijan, and then their support for the Kurdish enclaves in Syria, in Iraq, and perhaps in the future in Iran. So I think the Israeli ground game, if we can call that, is not over yet. Therefore, this ceasefire will hold for a while, perhaps, until there is a regime change in Iran, and there are two candidates for that. One is the
Let's come
Islam.
back to that. Let's come back to the granular detail of it. So you see this as a pause, not an end. Let's go to London. I think where Yasar Al Maliki is today, a Gulf analyst with the Middle East Economic Survey. You start looking at this from the other lens. Obviously, we got a very geopolitical end of the pipe there from Mehmet. Looking at it from the sort of oil supply and demand fundamentals there, a big deflation in the oil price once there was any sniff of this not touching oil infrastructure, first of all, over the weekend, and then the announcement of the ceasefire. Your thoughts of where that leaves us, 2 weeks after this sort of started, as the day that the U.S. government started withdrawing non-essential staff was 2 weeks ago. Oil prices, Brent was about $65 a barrel at that moment, and now we're at 68.39, having popped above 80. So, are we going back to where we were before this crisis started?
Well, thank you, Sean. The first thing that is very clear is that, the oil market is erasing most of the geopolitical risk premium from the Iran-Israel conflict after, President Trump announcement of a ceasefire. Now, as Mehmet Bey said, the coming hours will prove whether the ceasefire will hold or not. But prices should begin to reflect fundamentals, which continue to suggest that the oil market is comfortably supplied. With ample spare capacity from OPEC plus producers. More recently we saw data that shows that observed inventories have also risen in recent months. We had the continued unwinding of OPEC plus cuts also helping reduce some of the volatility in previous days, even though the group did not add significant output as headline additions were supposed to. So further de-escalation, to answer your question, in coming days could potentially bring prices to levels even lower than those before the conflict, as the market attention shifts back to global economy issues, growth, tariffs, trade disputes, central bank policy, and so on. On the positive side of things for us in the Gulf, we'll also begin to see tanker traffic, normalizing through the Hormuz Strait, hopefully in coming days. And the freight and insurance rates easing as well, although this could be a bit bearish for oil prices. So it will all depend on, how the market goes back to the situation before the, geopolitical uptick that we saw in the past 12 days.
Well, it seems to be rushing back to its comfort spot, the $65 Brent. Asif Shuja, director at GeoPo Consult. I presume that's an acronym, Asif, but welcome to the table for the first time. I wanted to get your thoughts on the slightly wider circle here. This 2 week war, Israel's war on Iran, joined by the United States. Seems, as I said in my earlier intro, that Israel was the winner here. Are China and India the losers as the US and as the US and Israel project further Western dominance into West Asia? Your thoughts on where India and China stand now in the aftermath of this 12-day war?
Well, thank you so much, Sean, for inviting me in this platform. Look, when talking about the game of dominance, so far as I think, India and China are not playing the game the way United States and Russia have been playing, right? Number one. Number two, the stake for China and India, so far as this conflict was concerned, was very high. In fact, at the time of during 1980s and during Carter Doctrine, it was the United States which was entirely dependent upon the Gulf. That is why this Carter Doctrine had come. If you see, it's not the US which is now dependent upon the Strait of Hormuz for its oil. It is China and India. In fact, they import bulk of their oil from this region. So that is why
And yet they remained incredibly quiet over the last 2 weeks. It was really only in the last few hours that they seemed to, at least China, get some kind of voice. But India and China have remained overt geopolitical actors in the Gulf, and making inroads, particularly China, into relationships here. But when the push came to shove, they were not present. I doubt Iran was too happy with them.
No, I don't think that is the case because in terms of power projection, China and India have never been there in the Middle East. It is primarily, a preoccupation of Israel and the United States. And these two countries are great civilization, ancient civilization.
So why
They know the
why
history.
is Iran giving Russia very needed drones to fight their war in Ukraine? They don't get anything in return for that. They can't expect some kind of support or cover in a time of existential crisis. Iran's giving China 1.5 million barrels of very cheap, nice oil every day. They can't expect anything in return from these two major powers.
Well, again, it is upon how we analyze the whole situation and how this has been, diffused and what power play has gone on into the background. I think then we can assess how much help they have got from Russia, from China. The ceasefire that has been declared by United States, one cannot go away without analyzing the implication of these powers' support to Iran, because the long term objective what Mr. Netanyahu had articulated, that has not been achieved. But still we see the ceasefire. This cannot happen unless and until there is a power block at two sides. So Russia and China are backing Iran, but if you want to see the kind of offensive United States has been doing in support of Israel, then that would be too much of a wish from Russia and China to have this in the Middle East. They have their own theater to look after. And I think Iran understand that part. So of course, Iran has been supporting them in their cause, including, in terms of energy. But also Iran is mindful of the realistic ambition that it can have from these two powers. This is what I see.
Mehmet, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, it's clear, and you said it's incomplete, but this is a never completed story, right? I mean, Israel wants to clear out the West Bank, wants to clear out Gaza. It has a very large objective here, and this is one very big step in the road now. They've essentially smashed every enemy in the neighborhood. Where are the wider powers? Clear where America stands. They came in and used their biggest bombs in their arsenal. China, India, Russia, Europe, watch from the sidelines, hoping for the best, really. Your thoughts on where this leaves the wider, take the permanent members of the Security Council as some kind of circle, and India perhaps, but where do you think they stand now? Is Russia and China weaker or stronger after this event?
Well, we have been talking about the new world order in the making, and this is part and parcel of that. And U.S. is the only power using its military muscles in the Middle East as necessary. We have seen this with B-2 bombers, and also Trump's involvement in that. Russia has its own problems in Ukraine, as we know, and also a separate track of negotiations with the United States on how to resolve the problem. And although it's providing some logistical intelligence support to Iran, I don't think it wanted to have any direct confrontation, neither with US nor with Israel. Then for China, this is a critical region. Almost 65% of China's crude oil and a massive amount of LNG from Qatar is coming through Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz. And therefore, China was on both sides. On the one hand, yes, supporting its beachhead in the region, that's Iran, but also making sure that Hormuz will not be mined or closed. And then you have to work also with the international community together, including
are we
the United States.
Is this a pivotal moment? The sense of taking China, for example, which has always been a trade-led power partner, finances, I'll build your road, you give me your cobalt, whatever it might be. Is there a moment here where China, a lot of talk is here that Iran has learned they need a nuclear weapon in order to protect themselves. Does China learn in this moment that they need to project military presence on the high seas in order for them to protect their supply chains of energy? I mean, is it a pivotal moment for the big powers here, or is this just another day in the diary of the sort of troublesome Middle East?
Yes, China was a free rider, as we know. The US controlled through the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, all the passage, international passage, and also in the Red Sea against the Houthis. It was NATO and the US taking actions. And Chinese gradually realized that they are building some forces, of course, militarily, not only for the Gulf and the Sea of Arabian Sea, but also for Malacca Strait, where the US Seventh Fleet is quite dominant. And China has realized it. Either it's going to collaborate or confront. And ideally, of course, both sides should work together. And I have a bold idea, which regards the Strait of Hormuz as an international area, because right now it keeps coming, that Iranian military threat to the passage of ships, 20% of the world oil and 25-30% of the world LNG. Therefore, there is an idea whether
I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, ultimately, the media does get carried away with the Strait of Hormuz, but it's hard to identify that it is a continuous. I mean, it's just a physical body of water that obviously has a challenge, but it's very, very rare that the Iranians wave that flag, if ever, just the last hours of this particular war. But I get your point. Some other idea for
the idea is whether we can have an international regime there.
Not a chance. Not a chance, man. Are you kidding me? This is America's water, and Iran plays around the edges of it. Yasar, where does OPEC Plus go now? There was kind of a natural expectation that they're going to go another big increase of supply when they meet next week. Oil prices at $70+ a barrel, that seemed like a no-brainer decision. Now, as we sort of drop like a rock through water back to 65 on Brent, is this a similar? Your thoughts on where OPEC Plus goes with this? Another bionic increase in supply quotas?
Well, it will depend on how they assess the market for August, and the fundamentals there. Let's keep in mind one thing, that the erasure of the geopolitical premium to oil prices will, in a way, get OPEC Plus back to its normal trajectory, allowing the group to focus on existing plans, and that trajectory until July or to July is accelerated production additions. And basically the idea is to try to benefit from relatively higher seasonal demand this summer to bring back some volumes. Now, this will not necessarily result in higher individual output or significant additions to exports, as seen in the muted additions in April and May. We have a disconnect between headline and real additions due to many factors, some of it, being existing overproduction, in some Middle Eastern countries, or diverting oil to refining and power capacities, especially in the Middle East, capping up exports. But this will remain.
If you take all of those sort of very practical reasons why you would be increasing supply through this window of the second quarter, how do you assess all of this happening in the same window of the 60-day warning that the U.S. government gave to Iran? They ended up with the war, and OPEC Plus sort of surprised everybody during that period by accelerating the increase of their oil supplies, or their quotas, and sort of their oil supplies. Are we sitting at the end of this 60 days now and the end of this war and say, yeah, looking in the rearview mirror, they were two totally separate events. They just coincidentally happened at the same time. And so they're not going to both end at the same time. That's kind of the point I'm getting at, i.e. that if they were happening at the same time and there wasn't a coincidence, then maybe now that the war is over, the purpose of soothing the world with lots of supply, the need of that may be over. Or are these completely separate corridors? Where do you stand on that?
Well, You have to go back through the timeline, Sean. I think one of the issues we have is that we tend to look at the, short-term history or past. You know, OPEC Plus agreed to unwind its cuts in December. They started, they postponed that for the first quarter, and then they decided to accelerate that. And part of the reasoning was always internal. Part of the strategy remains that, compliance states are attempting to increase
So that's a no
pressure
then, is it?
on overproducers. Well, yeah, for things to align,
So there's
listen,
no
we are,
connection. It's just a coincidence. These things happen at the same time. Asif, give us your
Sean,
thoughts.
Sean,
Well,
let me just add one thing on this. We are living in a world of perma-crisis, right now,
yeah,
deglobalization, all kind of issues happening so quickly at the same time, whether it is Ukraine, Russia, NATO, there is a lot of volatility and, things that we cannot expect happening. We
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
expect, the war
yeah.
in
And
Gaza to
more
go for 3
unexpected
years,
things will
2
happen.
years.
It's only Tuesday, for God's sake. More
Exactly,
things,
yeah.
there's lots of things that can still happen. Asif, the Straits of Hormuz, of course, as mentioned by Mehmet, and the diplomat in him can't help it. He's gonna put the UN right in the middle there, and everything can be worked out. But meanwhile, others are building contingencies outside of the Straits of Hormuz. We've seen ports built in Duqm, in Pakistan, here at Fujairah. They're built a very substantial export terminal. Your thoughts on where those fit into this wider geopolitical risk that is, Mehmet is right, seeking a solution, but nonetheless, others aren't waiting around. They're building infrastructure to avoid that.
Yes, Sean. Actually, what Mr. Mehmet has mentioned, the regime is already in place. And what is that regime? We have widely covered with my author, circumventing Middle East choke point. That is how to circumvent the Strait of Hormuz. The great powers of the world, they have been working night and day to circumvent that choke point. And these three ports that you have mentioned, Chabahar, Duqm in Oman, Chabahar in Iran, Duqm in Oman, and Gwadar in Pakistan. It's all in the Arabian Gulf, outside of that choke point. There, the great powers like China, India, they have been building the ports, and also the Gulf countries have been building internal pipelines, like the East-West pipeline in Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, as you just mentioned, Abu Dhabi Fujairah pipeline in UAE. These are being built towards that end. When the Strait of Hormuz is, God forbid, closed, then the mechanism will work. And of course, at a wartime, these can be expedited. Now we are seeing a slow progress, but it can be expedited. So yes, very much these mechanisms are being built towards that. These countries are
And maybe
working
that's
on it.
one of the reasons, amongst a few, I would imagine, but one of the reasons why we didn't see oil prices skyrocket above 100 in these recent days, given what was at stake, because there are these channels of increasingly contingencies there, insurance. Let's go to the survey question, because I think it's very much about looking forward now. What will be the main driver of oil prices in the second half of 2025? Will geopolitics, which, while very noisy, hasn't really been a big driver of oil prices except for brief moments. Maybe we got $10 for a week or two here, but that balloon seems to be deflating. OPEC plus supply, we've got another 3 months perhaps of this accelerated supply increase. They've already committed that July will be a 400 plus thousand barrel a day increase, and then perhaps August, which is a decision they'll make next week. Or the Trump tariffs are coming back. Stay tuned. There's a drama only around the corner. The 90 days of the suspended tariffs from early April, that 90 days is expiring. So, don't empty your popcorn boxes. Donald Trump will deliver you another episode soon. Or none of the above. None of the above. What will be the main driver of oil prices in the second half of this year? Which one of those, or none of the above? Mehmet, looking forward in the sort of, again, coming out of this crisis and there's perma crisis, and this is a pause, as you indicated earlier. The Where do you think this goes from the point of view of that question, and do we get back to the basics of global growth and supply and demand and so forth?
I think, first of all, I want to make the point that if Iran comes back to the international community, removed from all the sanctions, Trump also was making a threat that zero export from Iran, there will be sanctions, secondary sanctions. So if Iran could be coming back to the fold with the not regime change, but change of Khomeini, his son, or Khomeini's son, Hassan Hussein Khomeini.
Well, he is 87 years old, so we're closer to that date regardless.
Exactly. But if Iran comes back to the fold with a reformist government, then imagine the resources of Iran in oil, gas, petrochemicals. This is going to change the oil market significantly without any sanctions. I think we have to bear this in mind. Iran will come back as a major player in OPEC, already so, but more than so. And then it is going to be on the pro-Western front. This is going to change the geopolitical picture significantly because China and Russia will be losing a bridgehead in the Caucasus, in the Middle East, and in the Gulf. This is a critical. I think this is what Trump has in mind, if you ask me about that. And but I don't think that Israel will stop here. They invested so much into this military machine, into this grand design, and just because Trump wants it, they are not going to withdraw. There might be a pause, as I said, but it is likely that if in Iran there is no change, and they already removed all the air forces and air defense of Iran altogether, like they did in Syria and Iraq, so they will be happy to go back and hit whenever they feel it is necessary. And the other thing is, actually, we have to bear in mind the discontent, domestic discontent in Iran is so high. They hated the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, as you know, and they are the mainstay of Khamenei regime. If there is any change there, I think this is going to be a good news for the Middle East and for the Iranian people. And Turkey there is going to play some role because one of the outlets of the Gulf oil is through the Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline to the Mediterranean. It's currently about maximum 1.5 million barrels a day it can have. But if there's going to be a expansion of outlets beyond Hormuz, I think this line could be extended in a very short space of time.
Yasar, your thoughts on where we go next? Iraq, of course, in the middle of all of this, they were suffering from, they were losing gas supply from Iran for much needed electricity. The same, Jordan lost supply from Israel, Egypt lost from Israel. There's very tangible impacts of this war. Your thoughts where Iraq goes in terms of its behavior within OPEC and also its immediate benefit from the return, perhaps, of Iranian gas?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I'll start with that. Then I have a comment about Iran and China and so on.
Yeah,
so, with Iraq, the conflict has shown the many vulnerabilities that Iraq has, in terms of export routes, dependence on Hormuz, in terms of Iran, electricity and gas dependence. That makes up almost 40% of the Iraqi maximum supply, around 11
Can
gigawatts.
that just get turned on again in 2 minutes?
well,
They go to the phone and turn on the switch?
Yeah, so part of this, well, not the electricity. Electricity has been, payment for it has been banned by the Americans in February. But more when it comes to gas, last time I checked, which was last week with some of my sources, the Iraqis are very, they are on edge because they were afraid after the attack on South Pass that, gas supplies would be fully stopped. But at the same time, because Iran stopped some of its industrial capacity, they could actually send gas at the current levels at that point, which was 50% of contracted gas. Of course, these volumes would dwindle, and this is a big problem for Iraq because it continues to rely on Iran for a lot of its energy. Now, the other side, Iraq and OPEC, there will be a crisis in Iraq in terms of power provision. With the gas supplies from Iran being unreliable and intermittent, they will have to go to liquids, burn more of them through their refining system and through the power system. They are even buying gas oil from the market because they have some shortages there. So yeah, this could impact overproduction, quota, and so on. Now, keep in mind one thing: the tapering has helped with Iraq compliance. It has improved relatively. We saw good.
Well, the higher the quotas they go, I suppose the closer Iraq becomes inside the box. Let's have your last comment you just mentioned there on China and Iran.
Yeah, so in terms of China and Iran, I think the BRICS angle has been overblown by many. I don't see a deep strategic alignment between China, Iran, and Russia. It was all a matter of necessity. When it comes to Iranian oil exports to China, basically the Chinese are enjoying the benefits of deep discounts from a sanctioned country. They do the same with Venezuela. They do the same with other sanctioned countries, Russia. So there was never a Russian and Chinese serious interest in investing in Iranian economy, for instance. There was a lot of headlines, a lot of agreements, but never anything realistic. And the same goes for military support to Iran. Iran has been more reliant on itself to develop technologies like missiles and air defenses and so on. And you see part of the results of that is that especially in air defenses, their technology was not up to the game. So I think it's a very different relationship. When you look at Chinese support to Pakistan, that is deep, that is strategic. They give them the weapons, they give them the economic support. When you looked at Russia's support to Syria, they stayed till the last minute supporting the Assad regime and so on. You do not have that with Iran.
Iran has no friends. Asif, I wanted just to close up with your thoughts on, I'm quite keen on this idea of what's the legacy event here. What is we all came out of COVID saying we learned this, we learned that, and we'll never do that again, and we'll never do this again. Is there a China-India alignment? Is that one of the changes that it comes out of this event? Or where is China and India? Because we look to Asia and see them very much as competitors. But where do you think, how does that relationship, how do you think it has been impacted by this event?
China and India both have, in terms of energy, common interest coming out of the Gulf. But if you see the diversification that India has opted in the last few years, China is more dependent upon the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf oil, right? Now, that is why China, and that is another reason that China and US dynamics that is there in the play. Because of that also, because India does import a lot of oil from the United States also, right? Now, again, the question always is asked whether or why they are not militarily active. It is not there in their doctrine, right? The kind of power play that is being played by United States, that is just not the case in case of China and India. I think we should not look at their activity in the region from that perspective, hard power perspective. When it comes to defending their interests, like India itself had sent his navy when its interests were threatened, in the Strait of Hormuz, but that was for the defensive purposes, right? Not for the offense. So China and India, I think, should not be seen from that perspective. One last point, Sean, if you may permit me, how do we look at this, conflict? Because borrowing from your own question, is this the end of the beginning or beginning of the end? I think it should be seen as the beginning of an end, because what Mr. Netanyahu has achieved in this whole scenario is the offensive participation of United States in his own offense in the region. He has achieved it, right? So far as finishing the nuclear enrichment, it was started by the Shah of Iran, right? Not the current regime. So it's not specifically about the enrichment, but it's about United States partnership with Israel. So now they will be planning ahead from this new perspective. So we should be watching, how they are going to plan it out in their best wisdom. So this is how we should look at in the long run. The whole.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there.
I have one last point, if I may.
Please.
We
Quickly.
talk about China, Russia, India, Japan, Korea, everybody else, but not a mention of European Union. They are
Who?
almost non-existing here. But there is a good news that this week we will hear a lot about NATO. There is going to be a summit of heads of state in Europe, and this is the first summit of NATO that Trump is going to join. And they say, I hear, this is going to be a very critical meeting. So this is perhaps a subject we will discuss in the next
Absolutely.
editions.
Perma crisis. I would just like to wrap up by saying, and that obviously we got the survey result there, but also just to sort of go into that space of China and its role and its soft power, et cetera, in the region. I think the outcome of this event this week would have been a lot different if China hadn't curated the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia was it last year or the year before? I can't remember. Time is compressing, but I think that's probably the most significant development in the region for quite some time. And the fact that there is this now Chinese curated partnership between Riyadh and Tehran is a huge change, and that survived this week, which I think is also quite important. We're going to have to leave it there. This is the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end of this session. In either case, Mehmet Agucu, always great to have you back on the platform. Asif Shuja, come back again soon. And Yasara Maliki, best in business, sitting in London early morning. We appreciate that. And great to see me going from strength to strength. Have a great day, everybody. It's only Tuesday, so hold on. All the best.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.